Hello, and welcome to the Choralosophy podcast. This is episode 63. We Face People, The Courage of the Choir with Bob Chilcott. This is an installment of the Oxford series on the Choralosophy podcast, which is, as you are now probably aware, is a collaboration between myself and Oxford University Press and their fantastic choral repertoire library there and their stable of composers. And the mission of this series on the show is to continue to bring you fantastic stories from interesting people within the choral profession, but a little bit more global than the last couple of years of the show has been able to do. And that's the function of this series. So in this conversation, Bob and I, we just get really vulnerable with what it means to us to be choral performers and musicians, because in choral music, in a different way than in other types of music making, we are the instrument. So Bob and I will discuss these concepts of the vulnerability that we have to kind of work through in order to become competent choral performers that is kind of unique to singers, because again, we are the instrument. And we've talked about that a little bit on the show before, but I get the chance to touch these ideas with Bob's concepts of just his many decades as a performer and as an arranger and as a conductor. So you're not going to want to miss this open conversation. Because, of course, Bob Chilcott, if you don't already know, is a legendary performer, longtime king singer, a composer, arranger that his stuff is performed all over the world. So we get to touch these concepts of performance anxiety, his transitions through conducting, composing, arranging, all the different aspects of his career and what those things mean to him. So stick around. You're going to want to hear this conversation. I am really excited to tell you guys about mymusicfolders.com. Of course, there is the Resonant Singer's Mask, which is making a lot of really high quality singing possible right now during the pandemic, and it looks like we're going to need them still for a while. So make sure you head over to mymusicfolders.com and grab your choir a set of those. And then while you're there, especially as things return to more normal, you might find all kinds of other things that you need. Your choir folders, mymusicfolders.com, obviously, it's right there in the name. But then there's also mychoirrobes.com, which is a partner website where you can get really inexpensive and high-quality choir robes, which is a non-gendered solution for your choir uniforms. And the beautiful thing about this is when you're making a purchase for your entire school, you can enter Choralosophy at checkout to get a 5% discount, which on a school-sized order, that's hundreds of dollars oftentimes in savings. So I recommend you head over to mymusicfolders.com and or mychoirrobes.com and use Choralosophy at checkout. All right, everyone, I am here with Bob Chilcott, and Bob is, of course, well known to many of us as a composer, a clinician, an arranger. But of course, I'll start out by welcoming Bob by first telling a story of where I met Bob. Bob, this is going to be super awkward for you, or maybe me, but I have to get this out of the way right away, but because I'm fangirling really hard right now. But you were the soundtrack of my youth.
Good grief.
You and the King Singers on the Good Vibrations album, while other teenage American kids were listening to pop and rock while driving down the road, I was listening to that album probably 1,000 times. So welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Chris. Actually, I really liked that album. Made I think 1990, or some was made in 1990, some in 1991. Very exciting album. Maybe I can tell you a bit about that at some stage, but exciting album. But so I've enjoyed hugely my connection with the US, and for what it's worth, when we went into our first lockdown last year in March, almost a year ago now, I spent between March and May, I spent about the longest time I'd ever been at home for over 35 years, which is a bit of a worry. So that is, I've had a gypsy life as a musician, and it's been a wonderful one. In fact, I started as a boy chorister way back. I mean, I'm 65 now, so I started way back in the 60s. I was a boy chorister at King's College, Cambridge. Now, for what it's worth, then at that time, most boys sung in some sort of church choir simply because no one else did much else on a Sunday. But also you got sixpence for singing at a wedding. So it was, and you went to the circus at Christmas. So it was a really good deal. But my parents were very religious, and the church choir was the thing. And I joined King's College Choir, which was, nobody knew anything about that kind of thing. That was another world to most people. But I went there, and then I went there as a student again after I'd done that. And I started my life as a professional singer, and I was a good sight reader, so I could pick up quite a lot of work. It was a lot of church work, a lot of chorus work. I did a bit of opera. Actually, I sang a bit of opera at that time, and I also worked as an arranger for the BBC Radio. They had a big band and string orchestra, and I did a lot of work for them. So I used to write charts for singers, and that really got me into the whole arranging thing and writing, because I'd been writing for a long time, but we're talking 1970s when the musical language was very different from the language we know now. Right. So I was kind of working the commercial field, and I loved it. And then I joined the King's Singers by chance, because I stood in for my predecessor who was not well, and I ended up joining, and I did a huge amount of arranging for the group. So that's really how my path started. But I didn't actually really start doing what I wanted to do till the age of 42. It was 1997 when I left the King's Singers. I became a full-time composer, because previously, in the year previous, or a couple of years previous, I got a publishing contract with Oxford University Press, and it was a wonderful fillip for me. So I thought, well, this is the time to really go for it, and I did. And then by the chance, I ended up conducting. So that's really a sort of snapshot of how my life has progressed to where I am now, sort of.
So I'm very interested in a couple things there in your story to drill in on here, which is that I would have assumed, just kind of watching your career from, like I said, as a fan as a kid, and that the original dream would have been the performing, the touring, all of that kind of stuff. But as you say, you didn't really get to settle in on what it was that you were passionate about until you were older. Which I find that very interesting. So was and I guess I also would have assumed from looking from afar that your arranging really began with the King Singers, because we'd always see arranged by Bob Chilcott on little tracks here and there on the album. But you started more of a commercial writing and arranging. Is that true?
Yes, I was writing orchestral charts. That was really what I was good at it too, actually. So I found it came very naturally to me. And the great thing was then, of course, you would write your scores all handwritten, like I do now. Actually, you'd write your scores handwritten, and then you take them to the copyist, and then it would be played in the studio the next day. So it was a very quick learning curve. And I loved that, I loved that challenge of thinking on my feet and thinking quickly and working out how instruments worked. And I was a string player, but you wanted to work out how instruments work. And I realized the more I've done it, and actually since, to me, everything is all about breathing. Mm-hmm. So that was really what I discovered, but it took a long time for me to discover the point at which I would have liked to have been when I was 25, actually, to be honest. But it took me a long time to get there. But I had a wonderful time in between.
It sounds like it. Stuff like that. That's very cool. So what about the effect then, or the influence then, do you think, on being, actually, I'm going to pause for a second in the middle, because I'll tell you and the audience listening, it is a really windy storm outside of my window right now. So any noise happens, and I've noticed that the dogs of my neighborhood are quite worried about the storm.
Right.
So I will do my best to make it sound good afterwards. Okay. So my question was going to be, as you then take those arranging and composition skills into your time singing with the King Singers, Were there ever times when, let's say you scratch out an arrangement for the singers, and then of course you bring it into the rehearsal, and sometimes you are singing your own arrangement, correct?
Yes.
Were,
Yes.
were there ever times when that became its own kind of difficult process where you're learning that you had, maybe even done something you didn't like once you got it into the rehearsal process?
Um, to be honest, I did a lot of arrangements which I never actually took to the group. I did quite a few because I thought this isn't working, or this just doesn't feel, it doesn't voice right, or you'd hear a good song and it just didn't work, and so I felt I gained quite a lot of confidence from working with a group that I knew so well, actually from the inside. And I did a lot of arrangements too with orchestra. And that was an area which we really developed at that time, because we were doing a lot of orchestral concerts in the US. And so it was a thrill. I mean, I remember my first 3 months after I started with the group, I arranged 3 Christmas carols for the group and the Minnesota Orchestra. And I can remember we did the concerts in Orchestra Hall in Minneapolis, and I thought, I've died and gone to heaven. It was wonderful, and to have such wonderful players and singers singing your music, it really was confidence building. And I had great colleagues; they were very supportive, and also because I discovered through the King Singers, I learned so much from that group, but I discovered so much about the whole way of communicating with your audience. They were very good at doing that. They'd had a lot of experience of it. There was kind of Simon Carrington, who you'll know very well, Alistair Hume, Anthony Holt. When I joined the group, they'd been in it right from the beginning. So they had a real feel for how to tease the listener and how to bring the listener in to what they were doing. And I found that really impacted me very much from the whole point of view of how you made an arrangement or how you built a song, to really make that work for the audience. And that was a challenge which I loved. And I've taken that with me, actually, that they're still, when I go and see the King Singers now, most of them, they're all younger than my children,
Yeah.
But they're brilliant at shifting and keeping the audience on side, and they know how to make something work in a very unforced way. So a way where you're not in somebody's face. You're letting it happen. You're giving the audience space to come to you, and you're kind of meeting halfway. They are and were absolutely brilliant at that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I had a chance to see the group perform live as well a few different times and over the decades. And yeah, that's a really good way to describe it. One of the things you might not be aware of is that the Choralosophy podcast is entirely listener supported. The content I produce here is free and will stay free. And the way I keep myself solvent and keep the show running is having listeners who I depend on and appreciate dramatically helping out. Of course, using the promo code at the affiliates is hugely helpful. But if you want to be more directly involved with helping the underwriting of the costs of the show, you can do that at Patreon. Patreon.com/Choralosophy. Patreon is just a website that allows membership by voluntary monthly payment to help support a creator of content like myself. So you can go to patreon.com/Choralosophy and get in the door over there for as little as $3 a month. $3 a month will get you access to the private podcast feed. Once a month, I do some behind the scenes episodes that go right into your podcast player alongside the main show, as well as lesson plans, any other types of materials I create along the way for my classroom. I might dump them there, as well as advance notice of who's going to be on the show before the rest of the audience finds out, which means that you can kind of feed me questions of things you'd like to hear me talk about with that guest as they are signing up to come on the show. So head over to Patreon. If you support the efforts of the show and the mission of the show, that's a great way to help out. Shout out to the producers over at Patreon, Ulrika Igrain Munoz Alarcon, Chandler Smith, David Kowalczyk, James Mock, Kyle Peterson, Michael Herron, Ryan Main, and Stephen Kathy Kakachik. Thinking about your time still as a singer a little bit, because I want to help us kind of tie this story together to your later time focusing on your composition and arranging and all of that. But you said you grew up as and playing a stringed instrument, and then of course as we've discussed, you became more of a full-time singer there for a while. Were you, as a kid, were you a singer first in your mind, or were you a strings player first, or did you not think about it that way?
I was definitely a singer first, because in the choir, in the choir school where I was, we sang every day. Mm-hmm. So that was our job. And you got very quickly being part of a process. And you had to keep up with that process. It wasn't a taught process, actually. It was a sort of osmotic process, where you sat next to a guy who'd done it longer than you, and it was kind of do what he does. You know? It was the skill of the director to kind of pick the kind of person who could respond to that. And that was how it was done.
Right.
And that's kind of the English method in a nutshell.
Could we unpack that nut just a little bit? So, in other words, in the U.S., we do it very differently, because most of our kids who learn to read music learn in a school setting as a curricular aspect. In other words, they're taught how to read music, usually from scratch, at some later age. So 14, 15, 16 maybe would be their first exposure to serious regular music reading. And so how would you describe the way you learn to read music, and zooming in more to a day-to-day basis? So let's say you're in the church choir and you're handed a new piece of music. What comes out of your mouth the first time? How does that work for you?
I think for a lot of boys like me who started singing at that age, we probably started learning it. Now, I started learning the piano when I was 5. Mm-hmm. So I had a concept of intervals and texture, and I could hear different notes on the spectrum. But we were expected, when we went to the choir, we were expected to sit next to the guy next to us, and you were expected to be literate, to read those notes. Now, we might have made mistakes, and we had a system always in England. You put your hand up when you made a mistake, and if the director, who was sat at the piano, if he knew that you knew you made a mistake, then you had borne the responsibility for that. So then he didn't have to waste time fixing it, because he expected you the next time that you get that right. And so very quickly we learned to recognize intervals. So I was so impressed when I worked with Texas, all straight work there, and the way that they learn from Kodai, and that method is brilliant. But it was a complete, because it was a visual one. For me, as someone who'd learned to recognize intervals completely by ear, it seemed a bit of a strange one, because you even though it's brilliant, actually, I love it. I wish I could do it. It's a different kind of internal process. So we learned, it's a bit like, in a way, a bit like riding a bike or something like that. You learn very quickly to assimilate the kind of the shape and the intervals and style, and because that was what was expected, so you did it.
Interesting. So when you're learning a new piece of music in that environment, is there someone sitting at the keyboard playing the notes of the choir along as you read it for the first time, or is it all done a cappella?
It would have been done with piano accompaniment. So the director of music would sit at the piano. He would have a singer on either side of him, a junior singer, and we had that on a rota. You'd have a junior singer in the front, and one of them would turn the pages, so they had to keep on it as well as sing. And then there'd be 2 older boys behind who were kind of singing forwards, so the young boy in front was picking up what they were doing. And so it was just this process of it was a kind of mentorship. So, and he would sit there, we would generally it would be always be done with piano accompaniment, but it was done in such a way that it was you were given the responsibility to get what you had to do right. So we weren't overly helped, actually.
Right. Right.
There wasn't a lot of tolerance for mistakes and that sort of thing. It was kind of get on with it, you know.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Just the difference in how those processes are so varied around the world in terms of how people would learn, right? So, for example, my students, we sing everything from the very first read with no piano accompaniment at all. So they're expected to get the notes without any help from the keyboard, but we use solfege. So, but it's also they learn to hear it in their head, which helps them later. So, for example, my kids, if you ask them, the average kid, if you ask them to sing a fifth, they wouldn't be able to do it because you'd have to say, what does do to so sound like? And then they could sing it.
Yeah.
It's just because they use different terminology,
Sure.
but the same concept of they can still hear a fifth. They just in their head they think do so,
Yes.
and then they can right. And so it's an interesting thing, and the reason I bring that up, and I think that's a good contrast, is because what unifies all of it though is the end result. And as a singer for you, traveling around the world and now writing for singers. What do you think it is about singing that makes it something that people would tune into a podcast like this and listen to it? They would pursue it by the, millions of people around the world. And, why do we sing together? Like, what is it? What is so cool about it, in your opinion?
Yeah. Funny enough, we were talking about that in my home just a couple of days ago, because we were talking about, what is it that people, what makes people have the confidence to sing in a choir. And I think one of the things is that when we sing, we face people. It's a very simple thing, but we face people. Most musicians actually, you might be a wind player back in an orchestra, but you don't necessarily face your audience. Singers face their audience, and you look people in the eye. And I'm conscious of this as a conductor when you make that contact with people, eye contact. I remember when I started working with the BBC Singers. Now, that was quite a long time ago. I suppose that was nearly 20 years ago now. I remember at the time, one of the altos said to me, I find it really difficult when you look at me. And I said, why? I know I'm not really, not much to look at, but why? And she said, because I find it difficult. And they learned very quickly that eye contact was really important. And I realized perhaps that a lot of people didn't do that. Now, I worked a lot with kids, so eye contact was right there because they don't necessarily sing with scores. Right. And they look at you. So I think you need you need to go through a lot of hoops to become a singer. You need to have some courage, to have the ability to stand up and be part of something and be happy with who you are. And I love that dynamic of all sorts of different people coming together, and they sing together as one with there's a kind of natural hierarchy about it. Someone will say, oh, well, they're much better singer than I am, Mm-hmm. But I love to have contact. I can remember years and years ago, a friend of mine, he was standing there in the rehearsal, and there were a couple of tenors who were sharing a copy, and one of them, they were looking a bit lost. He said, look at them. He said, I think they don't know where we are. And they were looking a bit lost. He said, look at those two guys. He said, the guy on the left is a postman, and the guy on the right invented quadraphonic sound. And I love that idea of this, that you leave who you are at the door. So it's actually very enabling. You come in all the same, and I think there's a tremendous impact on people when they know that they're all in the same place, and that's what they're doing together.
That's really beautifully put, and I agree with all of that. Have you renewed your Sight Reading Factory membership yet this year for you and all of your students? If not, get started. It's not ever too late, in my opinion, to give your students the gift of confident literacy and the empowerment that that brings. It's amazing what happens when you really start to see the growth and you see that confidence build in their eyes. You can always use Choralosophy at checkout to get 10% off your whole order. For a school's order, that's a big savings, and you can use that code every time you renew each school year. I think one of the things that I would add is just encouraging people to think about singing as different than learning to play other instruments in a couple critical ways, and a lot of it has to do with the very vulnerability you would just explain, the looking at someone in the eyes. But I think the next layer I would add is that with singers, we tend to realize that we are the instrument.
Yes.
Right. We, like in a very fundamental, very real way. So if I'm standing in front of a wind band and the clarinets are flat, then I can talk to the clarinetist, and there is a psychological disconnect between, well, okay, my instrument's flat. I can twist my little embouchure thing, or I can wet my reed and I can blow a little bit harder and I can fix the problem. But when you tell a singer they're flat, that's me. Like I am the one who has done it wrong, and there's a vulnerability there. And I think the reason that the same reason that people are attracted to singing is the same reason some are afraid of it.
Yes.
Which is that someone will see you and someone will hear you, and there's a certain empowerment, though, that when young people learn to do it for the first time and learn to feel competent in doing it, that there's just a tremendous amount of power that comes from conquering that fear.
Yes, that's beautifully put, actually. And I would add even more.
Mm-hmm.
I think singers become very attractive because they show their vulnerability. I think, but as a singer, you can't avoid that, and that's a beautiful thing to do, actually, because you show yourselves to people. And actually, the fact that most singers, when they're standing in front of an audience, they have hopefully internalized and understood what they're doing. So they have that sense of ownership, and they have that sense of wanting that the listener to be a part of it. And I think for me, that's a very, very important thing, because it's finding out how you do that. And that's a challenge for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Now, have you? That kind of also brings up tangentially the concept of just the fear of singing too, and the performance anxiety. Were there ever times in the King Singers that you were nervous to perform, or by that point of all the chapel singing, you were over it?
Oh no, I think nerves were very much part of the picture. I found as a singer, I found certainly as a young singer, I think it was, as I got a bit older, I lost my confidence. When I was younger, I had much more. I didn't really think about what I was doing, but I think that was, around the time my voice was changing, I became more self-conscious and all that sort of stuff. And that's a challenge, I think. But as an older singer, there would be times when you'd be very compromised by maybe you weren't well. I mean, in the King Singers, we always went on stage. No one was ever ill, but you might not have been in good shape. I can remember one time we did a concert in Los Angeles, and we sang this wonderful piece by Ned Rorem that he wrote for us, settings of the Civil War poetry, absolutely magnificent piece. And there was a big tenor lead in that piece. There was a lot for the tenor to do. And I remember we walked off the stage, the group after it ended, and I didn't have a note in my body. I had laryngitis that tour. I did the whole tour with laryngitis. I didn't have a note in my body. I was terrified. And I went on, and somehow we did it. And someone came up to me after, and they said, "Do you know, I've heard that piece loads of times, and that's the best you've ever sung it."
Oh.
And I thought, well, I got away with it. But there was something very beautiful about what she said, because maybe you use different resources of what you have to give. And I found that, well, I was really moved by what this person said. So
yeah, that's an interesting phenomenon for singers, I think, sometimes, is that, I remember having a couple experiences in my youth with my voice teacher, where I would go into the beginning of the lesson and apologize in advance because I've been sick and it's not going to be very good. And then afterwards she might say something, well, that was maybe the best one you've done.
yeah.
Of that. And we started theorizing about some of those things. And oftentimes it's possible that when we sing, when we are at our most vulnerable, we maybe just take a little bit more care in the performance, being almost compensating for what we think is not there. And the listener gets more out of it than we realized we had to give.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. I think sometimes when things are too easy, maybe it's not working properly. I don't know.
Right. What about, okay, so thinking further ahead into your life now, I'm curious to tie these things together. What about nerves when comparing your experience in the past as a singer to your experiences on stage as a conductor? Are there anything, was it ever worse, or was it ever better? Or talk to us about how you've processed that as a performer.
I think that is a very good question. When I started conducting actually completely by chance, because I took over the choir. I was asked to take over the choir at the Royal College of Music in London. Big chorus, fantastic choir actually. But there were 240 singers in that choir, and 90 of them were first study singers. So they were really on it. And I was asked to do it. I knew that I could fix things. I was a decent musician. I had a good ear and all that sort of stuff. But actually, the mechanics of conducting, I'd never really thought about it. We all have a concept of it, but the mechanics were very hard for me. And so I started doing that job, and I started having a lot of help. Now, a man who you'll know very well, the Swedish conductor Robert Sund, he was incredibly helpful to me. And we went to Australia, I remember, on equal terms. And I said to him, whatever we do, I said, help me as much as you can. I'm a novice. I'm a complete novice. I said, please help me. And he said, I did a rehearsal, and I could see him in the corner of the room. And he came up to me afterwards. He said, hey, Bob, great rehearsal. He said, let's go and get some food. Let's go. Let's drink some wine. Let's go. So I said, oh, that'd be great. And he said, keep your shoulders down. Come on, let's do it. And anyway, the next rehearsal, it transformed. It totally transformed my whole thinking. And I remember I said to Robert a few years ago, who he was Eric Erickson's assistant, and took over his men's choir and did, I said, that was brilliant. I just wanted to thank you. Years later, you don't know, you transformed my life. He said, well, it was the only thing that Eric ever said to me, which I thought was lovely. But I found the whole mechanical side of conducting. It was actually the way that you would process the ideas that you were trying to shape into some physical action that made sense to the singer, but also became a kind of natural way of thinking of the music that you were showing that. That was the big challenge for me. So I did have some great difficulties with confidence in that sometimes, because you think, I'm about to bring this chord off. I can't remember how to do it. It's the simplest thing to do. Yeah. And you suddenly think, I can't remember how to do it. And things like that, these things that get in the way of what you're trying to do with music, but are very, very important. So I've been there. I've had all those.
Right. Yeah, no, that brings up another interesting comparison, really a contrast, I guess, between the U.S. and Europe more broadly, I would say, is that in the U.S. it would be almost unheard of for someone to get any kind of a high profile conducting position if they hadn't studied conducting, the mechanics of it,
Yeah.
at a university level, and probably even have a doctorate in it.
Yes.
Right. Which is interesting, because I don't know that I really think that our way is the best of doing that. And of course, that'll get me in trouble with a lot of my colleagues that are listening. But because what we do is we focus on the mechanics before the person has really learned to hear the music in their head and really know what it's supposed to sound like.
Yeah.
Now, your approach, the way you came about it, was the opposite, in that you spent all these years performing and writing and really developing a sense in your head of how the music should sound, but then had to come about the mechanics afterwards. And that's an interesting thing, because I remember being a 20-year-old taking conducting for the first time, and basically just learning to go like this while a CD played, a 4 pattern for those of you who are listening, and then of course I'm conducting along to a CD. And the problem with that, as I look back on it in my older years, is that at the time I was simply learning to wave my arm, but by conducting to a CD, it was going to sound great no matter what I did.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't really learning to hear the music and to respond to the music in the moment. So I almost kind of envy your path, because I wish that I had learned those things first.
Well, it's interesting you say that. I because actually, when I started out with singing, and professionally, when I started singing, the kind of style of conductor that came in to conduct choirs in general was pretty autocratic. So the singer was very much the person. He just had to do what he was told, or he or she was told by the conductor, and it was that was the style. And over the last years, I think that's changed. And one of the reasons is I think a lot of particularly English conductors, have been singers. And that's made a tremendous difference. And also, I remember a very powerful thing in my life, learning about music, was when I was a student. I was a postgrad student at the Royal College of Music after I was at Cambridge. And I was asked with another tenor to go and sing the little bits of solo. There were 2 tenor parts in the Stravinsky Mass, with a choir in London, and Simon Rattle, the conductor, was conducting, and the London Sinfonietta. It was a really good concert. And we thought, yes, fantastic, So, and they said, you'll have to sing in the rest of the concert too. So we said, absolutely fine, that's great. And we were singing the Requiem Canticles of Stravinsky. It was a difficult program. The Stravinsky Mass, I can't remember what else, but I can remember now. Simon Rattle he's just about the same age as me. So, but he was a really he was really making waves as a very powerful force in British music. Now, I remember he was unbelievably charismatic. As a singer, you saw the impact of. I mean, he had fantastic eyes, but apart from anything else, he was very, very powerfully charismatic. And I remember we were doing the Requiem Canticles, and he said to the bassoon player, "Could you play that bit again?" And the bassoon player played it again. He said, "I think you're getting it wrong. Would you mind just playing that again?" And he played it again. And then he said, "I'm sorry, Maestro, but I think I'm playing it right." Simon Rattle looked down at his score. There was dead silence in the room. And he said, he looked at it for about half a minute. Mm-hmm. So there wasn't a sound. And he said, "Sorry," he said, "I learned it wrong." And we all adored him. We do anything for him. He was, we didn't hear that kind of thing. We didn't hear people sharing the kind of process of, or it was a fantastic moment. I learned so much just from that. It was about being honest and being connective. And as a conductor, um, I've had that experience myself, actually, and that it happens.
Yeah.
And that was a very powerful thing. So I think in Britain, certainly, a lot of choir conductors have been both sides of the rostrum, and there's much more of a. I think in our choir life, people there's much more a meeting, and also there's a whole different concept about breathing. So actually, from a physical point of view, as a conductor, the breath becomes a different thing, and I think that's been a wonderful change, actually, in our choral life. Having said that, you see, I do admire the way in your country you do study, and there are wonderful teachers and the programs that you have, and you go to it through methods in great detail. And I think that's wonderful, because as a conductor, one's learning all the time. I find that whole thing because, and I think after this pandemic, actually going back, I was talking to another colleague just a few days ago, we're going to have to go into training, because you can't remember how to do it, lost the confidence, and physically teaching your body again to move in the right way so that you don't wreck your neck and your back and all that stuff, So it's a continual learning curve, but I think there are great virtues in both ways of learning, I think, actually.
Absolutely. And I think the way I process that dichotomy is to think that regardless of how you start, whether it's in a conducting class with a shaking hand because I could barely hold on to the baton, I was so nervous, at that age, or starting out as a singer like you did, I still really believe that regardless of how you start or finish, that it's so important for directors of choirs, and that's where my expertise is, of course, so I won't talk about the bands and the orchestras, but to direct a choir, you've got to be a singer in some capacity. We can't all be Bob Chilcott and sing for years in the King Singers, but if you're in a community that has a community choir, go join it. If you have a church nearby that you could sing in the church choir, I think one of the things that I see a lot is conductors who don't sing, and then we forget what that feels like, and like you said, what it feels like to be on the other side of that. And that is something, if you don't do it for a while, you do start to forget what it's like.
Yes, I agree with that. I conduct a choir at the University of Birmingham in England, a very good choir, 55 singers, and of course we haven't sung this year. Now, what do I miss most about that? I miss standing in front of them and hearing them breathe. You realize that actually the breath and the way that actually one transmits this kind of sense of being together, and the kind of meeting place of that breath is a very important thing. And I remember hearing the pianist Thomas Vashery do a masterclass once, and he asked a pianist to sing a phrase and she couldn't sing it. He wasn't happy. He said, you've got to learn to breathe. You've got to learn to shape. You've got to learn to feel how you understand the shape of a phrase, or how, and I go with that, actually. It's you would learn so much about the natural flow of phrases and shapes through the shape of the breath. And I think that's one of the things that, as a singer, you kind of start to learn, even though singing is a very hard thing to do. That's what one learns, how one learns to handle phrases and also shape pieces and think about what you have to give and how much you can't give, or the most you can give. And
and even just being able to think, how would I handle this line of music if I was being given the task of singing it, and how does that then reflect on what I ask of my singers
Yes.
when it has to be realistic, and the only way that I know if it's realistic is, could I do it? Or if I'm working with, because I have this weird life where I work with adult professional singers, but I also work with beginners.
Yes.
And I have to think, well, if could I have done that at age 15 when my voice was changing?
Yeah.
Those types of things, you really have to have those experience.
Yes, exactly. And when you sing, you have that inbuilt sense of when you've overstepped the mark with your voice, because you have to keep that balance internally.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a very powerful thing. I remember one time, again, I went to an ACDA thing. I was a guest, and I went to all the lectures of Anne Howard Jones from Boston. She was fantastic. And hearing her talk about Robert Shaw, um, the exercises that he would give to see what is the most you can give and what's the smallest you can give. You've got to know internally what you have inside you to make that piece come to life. We're all not Pavarotti. We're all not, we're all different. So we have to make that shape work to what we have.
Right. Probably the nerdiest product that I plug on the Choralosophy podcast is Voce Vista Video. VoceVista.com/Choralosophy will allow you to download a software that will revolutionize your students' understanding of how sound works and what to listen for when they are singing. It is a overtone analyzer that can be projected up on your screen, or I've even used it during the pandemic in virtual modules because I can screen share it and show different things that are happening there. But basically, the value to a choir teacher is that it allows you to prove to the students what vowel they are singing, to prove to the students that they might be lacking resonance, because they can see it on the screen rather than you having to be the bad guy, which that's what I love about it the most. Because in my early years before this technology was in my hands, you're not singing ooh. Yes, I am. You're not singing oh. Uh-huh. And then I had to be the bad guy. I was like, no, your vowel is not correct. And there was always an argument. With Voce Vista, I can show it to them. I can show them what happens to the overtone spectrum when they actually move their mouth, when they make their lips round instead of just thinking that they're making their lips round. It's a great product. And the cool thing about it is if you head to vocevista.com/Choralosophy, you can download it for free, play with it for 30 days, decide if you want to make the investment. It's a $99 software, but with my discount code, it's $89. And it is money well spent. I highly recommend this product to add a layer and a dimension to your students' understanding about the voice. Right. So let's take that same idea then into a little discussion about your compositions and the things that people would be able to find at Oxford Press. So arrangements, original compositions. How much of your time as a singer and then later conductor plays into your process for creating a piece?
Oh, hugely, because I think I'm teaching that through this year, because I've not been doing any conducting. I've been teaching at a school, a very good school actually. I've been teaching 2 days a week, and I've been trying to show that actually a lot of musical concepts are about the actual idea and gesture. And I think as we have to approach any piece of music we write, or we have to approach anything we conduct, or anything we perform, we have to do it for a reason. And we have to find that reason. We have to identify with the gesture of what we're trying to do. And as for me as a composer, one thing that's very important is to basically have an idea. And I think I find looking at a piece, if I'm going to conduct something, I do the same thing. The first thing I look for is the idea. Or you might have a very cloudy concept of what the idea is, but this is the idea, and this is the world, and this is the sound world, and this is the energy, or this is the opposite of that, the peacefulness. It's about the concept, and I think concept is where we need to be, because that's where the inventiveness comes from. That's where the kind of that's where we hit on ideas that we didn't know we had, and that, or resources that we didn't know we had. So for me, they're all very intertwined, and I'm so grateful to have had a performing life, because I think as a composer, for me, the whole reason I compose is because I want people to perform. You know, I've got a job as a composer, so it's nice to make a living. But actually, I write music because I want people to sing,
Right.
and that's a very, very powerful thing in me, because I found there were lots of types of music that I sang that I just couldn't enter that world. And when you can't enter that world for whatever reason, it's the most frustrating thing in the world. If your voice doesn't work, or you can't physically make that transition into being part of something which you actually identify.
Yeah, now this might be an obvious point, but I'm going to voice it anyway, which is that you write because you want people to sing and to perform. And the obvious point is that must mean that at some point in your life, your own singing and performing meant so much to you that you now feel the need to help other people have that experience, have those types of experiences. Is that fair?
I think it's absolutely fair. I think, if I'm honest, when I joined the King's Singers, or when I started singing with the King's Singers, I started singing with them because I filled in for another guy. Now, if I'd auditioned for that job, I'd have never got the job, because my voice wasn't the right voice for the way that it was then. And I found my way. I wasn't. I don't think my voice, if I'd auditioned, my voice wouldn't have been the kind of voice that they were looking for. But I was very quick musically. I could assimilate things, and I learned very quickly. But I had such a privilege singing some. I mean, I can remember some concerts which it was the most exciting thing in the world to sing in those concerts, and the feeling that I had. And it wasn't because it was me. It was nothing to do with me thinking, what a terrific singer I am, because I never thought that, and I didn't need to. I was part of something.
Right.
And we were all actually, when we were on, it was the best thing in the world. And I had the double whammy of, having those experiences as a singer, and sometimes it was with a piece that I'd written or arranged, and I thought, how lucky am I, that I've had that experience. And that's the kind of energy I find I want to transfer to others, because I much prefer listening to other people sing, because I found singing very hard myself, and I made it work, but I did find it very hard. So I'm very, very interested in projecting that to others to make that happen. And I think I understand what, to a certain amount, the joy of singing is. I think I've had that experience myself.
Right.
And one of the most beautiful things I heard was Pavarotti saying, every tenor in the world wanted a voice like Pavarotti. But he said the great thing about singers is every single voice is different, and every voice is unique.
Yeah.
And, I used to think of that when I'd hear Tom Waits, and I loved Tom Waits. And, that voice was not Pavarotti, but
right.
It did the same thing. I remember one weekend years ago, I heard, on the Saturday, I heard Randy Newman do a concert in London with where he sang and played piano. And then the next day, I heard Rostropovich playing Bach. And actually, the medium was completely different, everything like that, but I came away with the same feeling. You know, it was about a person being who they are.
Yeah.
And that was one of the most inspiring things I'd ever seen.
Yeah, it's really a wonderful phenomenon that, and it's something that I say to my students a lot, my young singers, when I'm pushing them really hard and I can tell that they're, maybe frustrated of how hard the work is in a rehearsal. And I'll say something along the lines of, guys, I'm not asking you to do this because I need you to do this. I've had chances to perform and have it be really excellent. I want you to have that chance. And this is what it takes. This is what you will have to do. So it's not about my ego. It's about me wanting to see you do it and see you have the power and feel that powerful feeling of being part of something. I love that that's how you phrase that, because that's exactly what it is.
Yeah. And actually, there's nothing better than that experience for you when you see that happening for them. And when you see someone's life, maybe it's changed a little bit because of what they've just done, where they kind of get it. Yeah. That's a wonderful feeling. I think that's the best feeling in the world, actually.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. So this is so much fun. I could do this all day. I would like to kind of wrap up with a couple concepts to discuss. One is a question that I like to ask whenever I'm talking with someone who is a composer. In fact, I just asked Will Todd this same question. It's kind of a tradition of mine. Has there ever been anything that you've written, maybe even something that's out there published, that you think is really, really good, but choirs just don't seem to perform it nearly as much as you think they should have?
Well, that's a hard one. There are a couple of pieces that I've written which are quite difficult. So maybe for that reason, they're not done so much. Now, I find the whole concept of understanding what people are able to do and what they're not able to do is something I work at, and because you want to do things to make people want to do it, and it might be quite difficult. I think a case in point of a piece, it's not by me, but John Rutter's Gloria. Now, John Rutter's Gloria is difficult. It's not an easy piece, either to conduct or to sing. There are some very, very tricky bits in it, and yet people want to do it. So they're drawn, and actually a lot of choirs have become better from learning that piece because they're able to, assimilate something, and they thought, well, maybe we couldn't have done that. I think I've written a few pieces. I've written such a lot, to be honest. There's quite a lot of stuff that maybe isn't performed so much, and of course, because that's the nature of having a catalogue. But I think that's for other reasons, so that maybe I misjudged the idea, or maybe it's just something that didn't communicate in the way that I thought it would. I can't think of an actual example, but there are loads of them, I'm sure.
Now, speaking of your catalog, are you one of those types of composers where all of your catalog is in Oxford, or do you have other places people can find your music?
Well, all the music I've written since 1995 is with Oxford, because that's when I was very lucky. I became contracted, so there was a kind of contractual obligation to publish everything. Well, the great thing about Oxford Press has been, it's been a gift to me, because I live 15 miles from the press. They're a fantastic bunch of people, and they really care about what they do. So they've really invested in my work hugely. So I've been very lucky from that point of view. Before that, I had my very first piece was published by Hinshaw, and that was great. And I had, obviously Hal Leonard through the King Singers connection, but everything since 1995 has been with Oxford, and it's been a very fruitful partnership. And for me, the partnership aspect of it has been the most exciting thing, because again, it's the same thing as being a conductor. It's about it's about doing it together. And I think, we all have things that we can and can't do. And I think I find there are so many things I can't do, but I know the things that I can, or I think I can have a good shot at. So you need people to help. And I think collaboration is the best thing from that point of view. So I've been lucky from that point of view.
That's such a neat thing. And of course, exceedingly rare in the world of composition, the further along we go. At least it seems to be from an observation of composers that contract with one particular publisher.
Yeah.
Is that true?
I think the publishing world has changed hugely over the last 20 years. And I think it will continue to change. I think I've been extremely lucky from that point of view, because I think that the thing is now that all composers, if you're going to build a catalogue, you have to build a kind of profile. You have to you have to have a body of work that represents because there are a huge number of composers all over the place, and everyone is trying to get their voice heard, and that's very hard. It is very hard, but it's a path that a lot of people find their way through different paths, and that's really great. I think one has to be inventive, and if the desire to do it is strong, you just have to find the way to make it work.
Right. That's awesome. All right. So the last thing, and this is kind of an on the spot question here, but because of course you're somebody with the benefit of 4 decades of looking at the choral world from different perspectives: singer, conductor, composer, arranger, and kind of living in wearing all of the hats that choir people wear, and you've gotten to wear all of those over the time. What are some things that you feel like the choir world should be talking about and learning about, discussing more than what we currently are? And what's something you would throw in there just as an encouragement on the way out for people to think a little bit more about?
That's a huge question, and
Yep,
a difficult one to answer. And it's a great question. And I actually, I know that in just under a week's time, the ACDA convention will happen. And it's all about diversity. Now, I think diversity is the story of our day. And it's a good thing it is, because I realize in my life how much things have changed. And there are a lot more things that do need to change. I'm very, I think on International Women's Day in Britain and the BBC, that every single piece of music on the classical music program was written by a woman. And, I think that's great. This idea that we need to look out, we need to understand too that being a musician, and being particularly a choral musician, because you can go anywhere in the world, and I've been lucky to go to lots of places, and you go to places and you realize that actually we're all the same. And I think that message is the most powerful message of our time. We are all the same. And I think choral music shows us that we are. We might do it in slightly different ways, and we might imitate each other. But we do that with joy, and we do that with respect. And I think that's the big thing to think about, because I think sustainability is the message of what will come out of all this, what we're experiencing now. Sustainability, unity. And we've not been terribly good at that recently. And I think we need to shout about that in the choral world, because that's what we do. And we do it well, I think, but we need to really be sure of that and work at it more.
Yeah, I agree. And that's I like your framing, because it is true that the choir world is not exempt from those problems in the past, but it is also true. So like 2 things can be true at once, right? Which is that it's also true that compared to many other spheres of human activity, the choir world has been including maybe better than some, in the sense that, I just think of it pragmatically, like how boring is it to go to a choir concert where all the music is from the same place at the same time? We've been diversifying programming for a long time, but now I think the next step, and this is where that ACDA convention and its message comes in, is that diversifying the programming is one thing, and that's great, but also diversifying who we are seeking out as in membership of our ensembles and our organizations, and in what ways are we reaching out to people, and not just to giving lip service to different kinds of music, which are two totally different things. And I think that's where we're headed.
Yes, I agree with that. I think that's great. Very well put.
Yeah. Yeah. This is so much fun, Bob, and it's been really fun to get to know you a little bit better and help people hear a little bit about the mind behind all of the Bob Chilcott pieces that we see and that we love to do. I didn't mention this earlier, but one of my favorite things of yours was your making of the drum.
Oh, great. I like that piece too.
It is so much fun. And I've done it twice now with my kids at school, and both times because I've been doing it for a long time at the school. And they love it too. Like it's a kind of a transformative piece. For once I can get Midwestern American teenagers past all of the kind of bloody, gory language in there.
Yep, I get you.
Yeah. Yep. And I might have to deal with a couple phone calls from a conservative Christian mother who doesn't want, the pagan imagery or whatever, but then I explain it to her and it's fine. But that's a fun piece to do. Everybody should check that out.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you for saying that. And again, that's part of this process, I think, that kind of piece. I think it contributes to that process. And that for me was a very important reason why I wrote it, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, like encouraging people to think about your perspective is not the only perspective.
Yes.
And there are people in different places in the world who would look at the same thing you're looking at and see something completely different.
Yes.
And you're right, making of the drum does put kids in those uncomfortable positions when you're working through it. Like why are we singing about this? Well, okay, let's talk about that. Let's talk about how that seems strange to you. But there are places in the world where this would not seem strange at all.
Yeah.
It's wonderful, and I think you're doing great work, and that is also in many ways the mission of doing a show like this. We get to have these types of conversations and really dig in. So I appreciate your time.
No, it's a pleasure. Thank you, Chris. I really appreciate your connectiveness, because it's nice to talk, and it's good to talk about these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, and have a great week.
Thank you. You too.
Okay.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, as always, for sticking around to the end of an episode. I enjoyed having that conversation with Bob, and I hope you enjoyed being a fly on the wall. If you stuck around this far, that means you probably got something out of it and enjoyed that conversation. I just know I was kind of fanboying and nerding out on getting a chance to talk with Bob, because as you heard at the beginning, I was a huge King Singers fan as a kid. And so that meant a lot to me to get a chance to have that conversation and share it with you. So as always, on the way out, there are huge favors that you can do for the show that are free, that help me a lot. Liking, sharing, commenting, interacting, helping me beat the algorithm is extremely helpful. It saves me not only time, but actual dollars to beat those algorithms. So please share liberally. Also, of course, for a little bit more commitment, you can leave ratings on the podcast apps that you use or on Facebook. You can also, but of course, that takes courage. Of telling people publicly that you enjoy this show, which maybe you have to keep that a secret. I don't know, but that does take a little bit more commitment, as well as joining the Patreon page, patreon.com/Choralosophy. You can get in for as little as $3 a month. The $10 a month level gets you on that producer level that gets shouted out on each show. So that's pretty cool. And then, of course, using the promo code at Voce Vista, SiteReadingFactory.com, Graphite Publishing, RyanMain.com, MyMusicFolders.com. You can enter Choralosophy at checkout there and get discounts. And that kicks back to me because they know you're listening and they are part of the community as well. So thanks a lot and enjoy the rest of your week. And we'll be back with you soon.